So I'd like to invite you to have a small understanding today of the method conversation analysis and how we've applied it to study communication and cancer in two related contexts or settings. The first is interactions between cancer patients and oncologists at the UCSD Moores Cancer Center. And the second is how family members talk through cancer on the telephone. Basically, we're asking the question, how is social order possible? And to answer that question, we collect a wide variety of naturally occurring video and audio recordings in everyday life, both in casual and ordinary settings. You might think of these materials as the social scientist's equivalent of the microscope. We are trying to address the ominous chore that the biologists and chemists and others have been successful in producing to crack the code of the DNA of social interaction, and we do that by looking very carefully at the practices and patterns of sequentially organized social actions. Turning to the clinic at UCSD, we've over the years collected around 200 video recordings of oncology interviews, and we've generated what we consider to be a lot of non-intuitive findings, one of which is that cancer patients are surprisingly proactive, which is striking because the history of doctor-patient communication suggests that patients like you and I are deferent and subordinate to medical authority, and so it's very doctor-centered. And so we've identified a series of actions that patients produce called patient-initiated actions. We're looking at things like fears, uncertainties, and hopes, not in the head or in the heart, but what we produce in human interaction in real time. We're looking also at a recent finding where patients, surprisingly, that are going to the cancer clinic don't spend a lot of time demonstrating their sickness, but they argue continuously with doctors about how well they are, and we call it justifying wellness. Basically, this is a videotape I want to show you. It's just 30 seconds. It was the second of the 200 that we've recorded quite some years ago, but it'll give you a sense of the inception of discovery. This is a 70-year-old woman that in a prior medical interview with another doctor was suggested that she have a double mastectomy even though she'd not been diagnosed with breast cancer yet, and obviously she went to this doctor to seek a second opinion. What I want you to look at is how she says no plus, because that no plus is an opportunity for patients like us to expand our views in medical encounters. So I'll just play it for you.
How many previous biopsies have you had? Two biopsies. And were any of those, I like to say, funny looking cells or atypical, as you know?
You know, I was told each time you've got this little tiny fragment brain, but there's nothing wrong with it, and we shouldn't take it out. And I said, you know, we're going to take it out.
Okay.
So I had two, and they were tiny, tiny little nothings.
Okay. Here's, that's good.
Two very quick observations. Notice on one hand, this patient argues there's nothing wrong with what's going on in her breast. On the other hand, she disagrees with a prior doctor who said we shouldn't take it out and says we're going to take it out. And that began to help us understand things like anxiety and fear that cancer patients have. And another observation is, notice the language is overbuilt. Tiny, tiny little nothings, totally redundant, is about as redundant as you can get. But it also gave us insight then into the importance that patients attribute to being well rather than sick in the cancer clinic. And this is how the discovery would go. We've identified techniques for how doctors design their questions. For example, preferring a yes or no answer from us as patients and not preferring, just preferring elaboration. So you get things like bowels moving okay, yes, and okay, no diarrhea, no. But notice what happens across that. No breast, ovary, colon, or whatever, you get no plus, nothing, absolutely nothing. And you get to see a mirror image of tiny, tiny little nothings in the way that the patient is overbuilding the wellness of the response. And it was okay, perfect. Have you ever had an abnormal one? No, always perfect. Mammograms were always perfect, and you see the same pattern. And here, nipples don't swell up. No, I don't have any of that. I play ball every day. I play tennis every day I can down at the rec center. Never smoked tobacco. No, never smoked, never drank, never used drugs, nothing of these bad things. So once we collect 50 or 70 or 100 of those, we believe we have a phenomenon, and we think we're en route to discovery. So we've identified various sequential environments within which patients initiate their actions. I just gave you 5 examples of an answer plus elaboration, but there are others. And a multi-year project that we've been working on is identifying how patients display fears and uncertainties and hopes and how doctors respond. And what we've done is flipped it, because historically research is focused on how doctors ask questions and patients respond. We're looking at how people like us try to get our agendas move forward. Here's an example of how we would look at that. Fears can be seen as directly stated or indirectly stated, and I'll just give you that example. And here's a finding which is pretty striking. A subsample of 44 interviews of first-time interviews showed that on the average, cancer patients display fears, uncertainties, and/or hopes 24 times a medical interview. And these interviews are anywhere from 15 to 25 to 30 minutes long. That creates all sorts of clinical communication problems for doctors who have to deal with highly proactive patients in short amounts of time. Another problem is that 70% of the time when people like you and I go to see doctors, especially regarding cancer, we're indirect rather than direct with doctors. We hint, we give cues, and we give clues, and that compounds the communication difficulty. We also look at embodied actions. You notice the patient in the video did tiny, tiny little nothings. We look at gesture and how things like size of tumor is negotiated and coordinated by patients and by doctors. We look at facial expressions, such as this sarcasm between this patient who says the lucky one, but obviously is not. Independently, by the way, this was a painting by another cancer patient. They're not related at all, and it is interesting, is it not, sometimes to see the relationship between art and real time in everyday life. We also look at how cancer is not something that's just molecular or cellular, but actually gets built in and through socially constructed interaction. This patient describes a friend wrapped around the stem of his brain like, oh my God, and it becomes an alien invasion. And in this case, also, it metastasized in his leg. So when you look at people's bodies, not just their talk and the transcription, you get a much stronger access to these sets of materials. Switching over to the family phone call materials, we have a corpus called Malignancy Corpus. Years ago, a family in San Diego donated to me a shoebox of audio recorded phone calls. And these phone calls turned out to be 61 calls over 13 months. And it's the first natural history ever of a family talking through cancer on the telephone, from diagnosis through death of a loved one. And we've been studying that for many years, and we're focusing on a major problem in contemporary society, which is communicating about cancer. Now, that ended up 10 years later in a book, and it's gone through 4 phases of development. We had amateur workshop readings in 2006 at SDSU, and with NIH we did a phase 1 feasibility study at a professional theatrical level with San Diego and Denver, and then we just last fall finished a national effectiveness trial across 4 major cities in America. We call this the Conversation About Cancer Project. And basically, these are just examples of some of the findings from the book. I'm not showing you the basic science of conversation analysis, just its dissemination and application here. But all the dialogue in the performance is verbatim from the real phone calls. And so it's a very powerful performance. It was initially called the Cancer Play. It's now called, appropriately, When Cancer Calls. A family, a phone call, a diagnosis, one family's journey through cancer. What we've come to understand is that we've created a new, kind of unknowingly created a new genre of entertainment education by blending together the materials, and thousands of people have seen it. It's had very, very powerful impacts on audience members whose lives have been touched by cancer. This is an example of the opening moments of a phone call when the dad informed the son that mom was diagnosed with cancer. If I can get it up here.
What's up? They came back with the renal biopsy results for the heart. The tumor that is the renal gland tumor tested positive. It is malignant. Okay. That's the one about the kidney. Yeah.
Here's what it looks like on the stage.
What's up? They came back with the needle biopsy results, or at least in part. The tumor, that is the adrenal gland tumor, tests positive. It is malignant.
Okay. That's the one about her kidney?
Yeah.
This is the next morning when he talks with his mom for the first time. I don't have time to play it for you, but the prognosis that the mother tells the son is that Good news is that I have 5 years to live. Bad news, 6 months. Of course, they didn't know it then, but she lived 13 months, and the 61 phone calls traced that whole journey. This is what it looks like. I'll just play just a bit.
There's an adenoma type that is worse, but this is very fast, very rapid, very difficult to treat. There's a very small percentage of people that do respond, and we're talking at that maybe 5 years. So it's real bad.
A serious moment at the outset of the phone calls. We've taken this to 4 major cities across the United States. It was a randomized controlled design. We developed everything with it, and we had about 1,000 patients, patients, family members, survivors in this particular trial, and almost 700 people completed a 30-day follow-up on this as well. Striking results. I'm not going to have time to go into a lot of detail on these results, but in the 4 top bars you can see that almost 80% or almost 80% of people would recommend it highly. They found it appropriate, it influenced them, and it held their interest. Nearly 2/3 found that it was uplifting and inspiring and it was authentic, and the play was too depressing for less than 17% of people, which if you think about it is very against the grain, because the mother dies in this journey, but all audience members say it's not about life or death, which we don't handle well in the Western world. It's about the power of family members to communicate through the journey, and in fact this family exudes the fact that through the journey they become closer, not more distant. We developed indices of impact. You can see that the placebo was outperformed by When Cancer Calls in a highly significant way. I don't have time to go into these, but you can see that the findings were very striking. We also have very powerful qualitative data. For example, a family member said, "I think the big C here is really communication, not cancer." An amazing experience, an excellent piece of work. It's the type of thing that I think will allow people like me to heal. And those are very powerful comments from people watching an 80-minute DVD. Now, we are in a phase 4. We're in a commercial business development on this as a product now. It's not typical for social scientists to have products, but we've kind of ended up with one here. And so we're just launching it this summer. We're going to a lot of diverse professions. We feel it's a very innovative educational set of possibilities. It's already been screened at Pfizer Corporation. We're talking with the Marine bases and lots of different places. Here's just a list of possible clients that we either have or will be talking with, because it turns out that it's a triggering device that gets people to talk openly about the cancer journey in ways that they can't otherwise do, and do not do in many cases without something like this. And final comment, 3 projects we're working on. We just finished filming a documentary film on breast cancer and communication at the UCSD Moores Cancer Center. It's been a year of filming, and we've been tracing one breast cancer patient and her husband in the clinic, at home, at work, at church, in the community. And so it's a very powerful set of data. We soon will launch a project videotaping genetic counseling sessions, following family members at home and videotaping their decision making to determine how they make sense of genetic counseling sessions, and then taking it back to the genetic counseling session to see the loop and track genetics. And we're taking the fear, uncertainty, and hope stuff and we're moving it into breast cancer teams, which has been Ann Wallace's team at UCSD, the team that's been the focus of the documentary film. So those are all underway, and I'd like to thank David Dozier, colleague who's here, and a variety of other sources. Thank you very much.
So we'll be asking questions, and I'll take the mic to you because that helps us record. I do want to say, by the way, one thing is that when I first came here, one of the first people who was willing to shepherd me was Wayne, and I'm very appreciative of that. Unfortunately, not only is he a good communicator, he's very good at reading you. So at the end of every meeting, I'd get the Steve, we're feeling a little tense today. So it was almost therapy. So anyway, questions for Wayne?
What's your conclusion?
That many people have, the number one health fear in America is cancer, and that people have difficult times in clinics and in homes and families talking about the impact of cancer on their lives. And that in the clinic, there are primal concerns that we have, our fears, our hopes, our uncertainties. 70% of what patients raise to doctors in terms of psychosocial concerns are not adequately addressed. And so that's a pretty scary thought. And 2/3 of what we bring into the clinic is not biomedical or symptomatic, it's psychosocial. It's about our lives, our lifestyles. So we need to work with teams of doctors and nurses, et cetera, to help them address patients' concerns better. In the home, cancer makes a big dent on people's lives, and we've gotten into the home and homes, and we've shown it to thousands of people, and we're in a position to, I think, benefit them as well.
Wayne,
Hi.
have you done any studies in terms of disparities, in terms of ethnic groups, racial disparities? Because we have a big collaborative grant with UCSD Cancer Center that this could certainly fit in.
Yeah, we just got a paper, I think, accepted at HealthCom, or nearly so. You want to give them a little bullet?
Sure. The synopsis was we went in with the assumption that because this was a white family, that because this was an Anglo family, that it would not have the same authenticity with people of color. And what we found was the opposite. In fact, audience members who were people of color tended to find it more authentic, more likely to say, I would recommend it to a friend, which we found quite interesting because it goes counter to all of that notion of market segmentation. So it was quite an interesting finding.
Yeah, people of color, different racial, ethnic backgrounds, basically, we believe attribute in many ways more value to the power of communication in families than maybe white Anglo-Saxon Protestant family structures, which is interesting. So that piece is just soon to be out, but it's also across the grain. I think it's non-intuitive.
You mentioned in passing that we don't handle this very well in the West. Could you say something about how it's handled in other places?
Well, I think first off, we don't care for our elderly in the Western world. And we also are extremely fearful of death. Star Trek had it wrong. The Last Frontier is not going into the universe. It's, I think, people dealing with death and dying. And there's been a lot of research on death and dying, but when we study stuff in communication, the stereotype that is if you're diagnosed with cancer today, people hear that you're diagnosed, they associate that with death. The survival rate in cancer has gone up since I've been working from the low 40s to the low 60s. And also what we're finding is that when you study communication, it's about life, not death. It's about hope, not despair. And it's about good news as preferred over bad news. So we don't find a lot of problems of people talking about death in the cancer clinic or at homes. And if they do a fairly good job of it. But our stereotype is that we have all these extreme difficulties. So we wouldn't have known that if we wouldn't have been studying communication directly.
So we're out of time for questions, but Wayne, I'd like to ask the audience something. Those of you from SDSU, how many of you have seen the play When Cancer Calls? Maybe that wasn't clear, we were buzzed out. How many of you have seen When Cancer Calls? Oh, you know, we should do that again here at SDSU because I think that
you saw the early version.
I saw a very early version and it was extremely impressive, and not only for me and the people I was with, but you could tell it across the whole audience. And so it's time for a new showing.
Great.
All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Are you going to use it?
Yeah. Actually, Wayne, don't go away. While that sets up, we'll do one more question because I saw Red Miller had a question, and since we're waiting, we might as well let you ask.
Yeah. Wayne, to what extent do you think your findings are specific to this particular diagnosis? Would they generalize across a number of challenging diagnoses? And would they further generalize to any other very family impactful issue?
It's a great question. Nationwide and locally, for the thousands of people that have seen When Cancer Calls, their comment has universally been that this isn't just about cancer. It's really about dealing with challenging health circumstances, moving through time and space together and relying on communication to get that done. So I think there are idiosyncrasies to each diagnostic disease, and cancer, as you know, has its idiosyncratic nature. And there are specific things about that, but our human nature is how do we deal with debility and the inevitability of aging and disease in general. So communication is not just, this is not just tied to cancer. We don't